Canada just humiliated the most powerful nation on earth, and the proof is a single page of paper versus 14. Trump issued his final ultimatum. Not a warning, not a negotiating tactic, a final demand. Accept complete American control over Canadian energy, permanently and unconditionally, or lose everything. The $735 billion energy system built across 60 years, the pipelines, the power grids, the refineries that heat American homes and fuel American industry, all of it on the line. If you've ever wondered what it looks like when a superpower overplays its hand in real time, you're about to find out. Stay with me, because what Carney did next, and what Warren Buffett said about it, will completely change how you see this confrontation. And drop a comment right now. Do you think Canada actually wins this? I read every single one. The ultimatum arrived through formal diplomatic channels, a 14-page document delivered from the State Department to the Canadian ambassador at 9 in the morning, stamped with a 72-hour deadline. It was titled, Framework for the Normalization of Bilateral Energy Relations. Bureaucratic language designed to sound cooperative. But anyone who read past the title understood immediately what it actually was. 11 provisions, each one a demand. Together, the most sweeping seizure of resource sovereignty one allied democracy has ever attempted against another. Provision 1 forced Canada to guarantee 4.2 million barrels of crude oil per day to the United States at a permanent discount of 18% below global market rates, locked in by law, no matter what other buyers offered. Provision 2 extended that same discount to natural gas, with penalty clauses if Canada ever sold to non-American buyers without American approval. Provision 3 handed American-appointed committees operational veto power over Canadian pipelines, their routing, their capacity, their daily decisions. Provision 4 stripped Canada of the right to sign any new energy deal with any foreign buyer without 90 days' notice and America's right of first refusal. The remaining 7 provisions extended this framework across electricity, hydroelectric power, nuclear fuel, hydrogen, critical minerals, and carbon capture. Every single sector. Locked in, discounted, overseen by Washington. A Canadian energy economist who reviewed the document said publicly, "This is not a trade proposal. It is an indenture." An international trade lawyer in London called it the most extraordinary demand between allied nations he had seen in 30 years of practice. One sentence from his analysis cut through everything. It reads as though the United States believes Canadian energy is American property that Canada has only been temporarily allowed to administer. If this story is moving fast, it is because the markets are repricing this in real time. Make sure you're following along daily so you don't miss what comes next. Mark Carney rejected it in 4 hours. Not after careful deliberation. Not after consulting with allies or running economic models. 4 hours. And the rejection itself was a weapon. 1 page, 2 paragraphs, 0 diplomatic softening. The first paragraph acknowledged receipt. The second stated, Canada rejects the terms in their entirety. Canadian energy resources are sovereign Canadian assets. Their development, pricing, export, and distribution are determined by the Canadian government in the interest of the Canadian people. Canada does not accept foreign oversight of its energy infrastructure, foreign pricing controls on its energy exports, or foreign restrictions on its right to sell its own resources on the global market. These terms are not a basis for negotiation. They are a basis for refusal. 14 pages of demands, 1 page of no. The difference in length told the world everything about who actually held the leverage. The party that needs 14 pages to justify its position is never the party that holds the power. But why was 4 hours actually considered slow? And what had Carney already decided months before this document even arrived? Stay locked in, because the answer to that question rewrites the entire story of this confrontation. Carney held his press conference in Calgary, Canada's energy capital, flanked by the leaders of the country's 6 largest energy companies, every one of them standing behind the rejection. The White House had been counting on industry pressure to fracture the government's position. That hope died the moment those 6 executives walked onto that stage. Carney opened by saying he wanted to explain something the White House did not appear to understand. Then he paused and said, "Some might ask why we took so long. The room laughed. The first laughter anyone had heard in any Carney press conference throughout the entire confrontation. It mattered. Because what came next was not a political statement. It was a surgical dissection. He explained that the United States issued this ultimatum because American energy markets depend on Canadian supply, and Canadian supply had been quietly diversifying away from American buyers for months. The India deal, the European LNG contracts, the Asian partnerships, the new pipeline infrastructure pointing east and west instead of south. Each of those moves had been reducing American leverage, one contract at a time. The ultimatum was not a show of strength. It was a panicked attempt to slam shut a window that was already closing. Then Carney delivered 10 words that spread to 14 countries within the hour. You don't issue ultimatums when you hold the leverage. A Harvard Business School negotiation professor posted those 10 words with one comment. This should be the first slide in every negotiation course in the world. The argument was airtight. If the United States held the leverage, it would simply set its terms and wait. The 72-hour deadline proved it believed time was against it. And the fact that time was against it proved the leverage had already moved. The ultimatum was the confession. Carney had simply read it out loud. What happened next was not metaphor. It was operational. The bilateral energy architecture, 60 years of pipelines, power interconnections, supply contracts, joint ventures, and integrated processing chains, began coming apart simultaneously. Canadian pipeline flows into the United States were throttled to minimum contractual levels under emergency sovereignty legislation. American refineries that had been receiving 4.2 million barrels per day faced the prospect of receiving half that, with no guaranteed timeline for recovery. The refining sector warned that 90 days at reduced volumes would create fuel shortages across the Midwest and Gulf Coast that no alternative supply could offset in any realistic time frame. Hydro-Quebec invoked force majeure provisions on its New England contracts. Vermont, which sources approximately 70% of its electricity from Canadian hydroelectric imports, declared a state of energy emergency. New Hampshire and Maine followed within days. Vermont's governor said, "My state is going dark because the White House issued an ultimatum that any first-year negotiation student could have told you would be rejected." 3 joint venture LNG facilities on the Pacific coast, $12 billion in combined investment, were suspended when American partners withdrew on legal advice. Brent crude spiked 8% in a single week. Western Canadian Select decoupled from American benchmark pricing for the first time since the index was created. European and Asian buyers began signing forward contracts for Canadian supply at premiums that reflected the new competitive reality. Canada had more buyers than it could supply. American refineries had fewer suppliers, higher prices, and infrastructure built around a feedstock that was now redirecting elsewhere. Warren Buffett drew on his acquisition of Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad to explain what the markets were now processing. "When I bought BNSF," he said, "people asked why I was investing in railroads in the 21st century. My answer was simple. Railroads move things that cannot be moved any other way, along routes that cannot be replicated through geography that does not change. That is a permanent competitive advantage. Canadian energy infrastructure is the same. The pipelines, the power interconnections, the processing chains, they exist because the geography and geology demanded them. 60 years of infrastructure was the most valuable integrated energy system in the Western Hemisphere. And it is crumbling. Not because the geology changed, not because the geography changed, but because a political relationship that the infrastructure required is gone." Then Buffett delivered his conclusion with the quiet devastation of a man who has spent 70 years separating signal from noise. The ultimatum was not a negotiation. It was a confession. You issue ultimatums when you are losing leverage and you know it. The demand for locked-in pricing, locked-in volumes, locked-in oversight. That demand for permanence tells you they understood the position was temporary. The window for locking in American access was closing. The ultimatum was the attempt to slam it shut. Carney's rejection was the moment it closed. And everything that followed, the pipeline restrictions, the power reductions, the LNG collapse, the market repricing, is not retaliation. It is the natural consequence of a system held together by a political relationship that no longer exists. This analysis is updated daily because this situation is moving faster than most people realize, and the consequences will reach American utility bills before most people are prepared. If you want to understand the full picture before it hits your wallet, follow along and you'll never fall behind. And if this breakdown gave you clarity that the headlines didn't, share it with one person who needs to see it. Subscribe below. No pressure, just signal over noise, every single day.